Hello, I'm Aaron Wren of City Journal, www.city-journal.org, and I'm here today with Richard Florida, best-selling author of numerous books, including Rise of the Creative Class and The Great Reset. Thank you for taking the time to talk, Richard.
Thank you, Aaron. You know, I'm a huge fan of your work, so thanks. It's great that we can have this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying so. Richard Florida is the director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, and also a clinical research professor at the NYU School of Professional Studies. And we're here today to talk about a new NYU report Florida co-authored called New York City, The Great Reset. First, for those who haven't read your book by that name, what is a Great Reset?
Well, you did the best and most thorough review of that book of anyone, so thank you. What that book tried to capture is, in the wake of the economic and financial crisis, which is now receding from our memory, the idea that it wouldn't be simply things that people talk about, government intervention in Keynesian demand stimulation or government bailouts, that wouldn't or doesn't recast our economy. Even something that has had a very major effect, like new rounds of technological innovation, and even in the Great Depression, you know, they use this, Larry Summers used this term now, secular stagnation. Alvin Hansen created that term to say during the Great Depression we were going to have a period of prolonged secular stagnation and we needed government intervention to solve that problem. Well, who was right was Hansen's colleague at Harvard, Joseph Schumpeter, who said what happens is you get new rounds of technological innovation that occur and they power the economy out of slumps. What I simply added to that line of argumentation is a geographic dimension. And believe it or not, there is a Marxist geographer named David Harvey, brilliant, very strong critic of capitalism. So people may have issues with that. But he created this construct he called it the spatial fix. And he said what propels capitalism forward, but also in his words lurches it into crisis, alongside a technological fix, a la Joseph Schumpeter, is a spatial fix. The best example of a spatial fix that I can come up with is this notion, concept, reality of suburbanization after World War II. And I think what Harvey would argue, certainly what I would argue, is that after the war, what really propelled the great growth wave, the birth of the middle class, the great golden age of American capitalism, wasn't just technological innovation. It was a growth model around suburbanization where we built homes, the aspirational middle class occupied those homes, they worked in factories, their wages went up, they could buy the products flowing off the assembly line. And what the Great Reset says is today we're at the beginnings of a similar shift. But it's no longer just the expansion of the suburbs, and actually it's two-pronged, as you know. I said, one, it's the intensification of development in the urban center, in the great cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago, but also it's the extensification of development out through the suburbs and in these great constellations of metropolitan areas I call mega regions. So our great reset will be more urban, but it won't simply be the city is back. It will be the rise of a new urban conglomeration I call a mega region, like the Boston, New York, Washington area.
How is New York experiencing a Great Reset?
Well, you know, it was a cute title. Obviously, I felt I was honored that my colleagues wanted to use that title, but I think as we came through this, we were struck by the degree to which New York has rebounded after the economic and financial crisis. And as you know, because I wrote about this in The Atlantic, and you and I had talked about this, when I wrote that cover story for The Atlantic back in 2007, 2008, even my editors were urging me to write a piece about the eclipse of New York, how other great global cities were going to take over from the spot of New York as the great global megacity. And I thought, no, that's not the case. In fact, New York is quite diverse. It's quite an economically diverse, heterogeneous economy. It isn't just a finance economy, although finance certainly contributes a great deal. It was going to be able to remake itself because in its economic DNA, it has always been able to remake itself, reinvent itself, engage in creative destruction, be resilient and reset. I think what really struck us in this report, and it's something you and I both grapple with in our field, is the degree to which New York's comeback has created, I guess, a series of problems or challenges or crises of success. So that New York has come back so fast and so quickly, enormous pressure on its real estate markets, this incursion, that the transformation of real estate into a global asset, the movement of the global super rich, the development of all these super luxury projects, the pressure with technology and creativity on the housing market. So this idea that New York faces a kind of new urban challenge, which is a challenge not so much of failure, as was the case in the 1960s and 70s, and certainly there are certain things the city has failed at. But in many degrees, the new challenge it faces, or new crisis it faces, is a crisis at least in part of its success. And to at least pose that challenge, it's not an either or. I kind of said, in New York, it's the best of times or the worst of times, depending on who you are and where you're situated. I think that gets at it, and we try to create a little bit of a facts-based dialogue about those two things, two elements.
How do these best of times, worst of times play out within the dynamics of the three classes of workers? You have creative class, service class, working class.
Well, I think, the creative class broadly defined, the scientists, the technologists, the managers, the business people, the knowledge workers, the artists, the musicians. It's become a fundamental part of the New York economy. It's 35% of the workforce, and as we report, it takes in $117 billion in wages, which is about more than half of all the city's wages. The issue with that is, as much as we like to think Brooklyn is a creative economy and this is spread, when we look at the numbers, it is really a Manhattan-based economy. Roughly speaking, about 1 million of the 1.4 million creative class workers work in Manhattan. In Brooklyn, if I remember correctly, it's about 166,000. It's less than 20% of the ones that are in Manhattan, and roughly about 11 or 12% of the New York creative economy. And what's really troubling for me is the fact that, and for many people, the fact that the other classes have lagged so far behind. If the average creative class worker takes say 90 grand a year, more or less, the average working class, blue-collar working class person who built the city, built this country, that class has shrunk down to about 16% of the workforce, less than half of the percentage of the creative class. That person's taking in 40 or 45,000. What's really daunting, of course, is that the service, what I call the service class, and I'm actually working and writing on this. I have a lengthy report that we're working on right now to try to disentangle what is this service class. But it's people who work in food services, food preparation, retail trade, office and administration, clerical work, healthcare workers, personal care workers. Those folks are about 1.9 million to 2 million workers. They're making a little bit more in Manhattan, about $44,000. But in the outer boroughs, they're making about 30 grand. But some of them doing 1, 2, 3 jobs. So really, that's when I see the class divide in the city. I see it in those terms. It's not just rich and poor. It's about how you're attached to the economy. And that service class not only doesn't pay very well, but it's growing at the fastest clip. So I think the creative economy also creates this counter economy, a service class economy. And that, when we talk about a tale of two cities, I think that's really what we're getting at. One class has done reasonably well. The other class has not done very well at all.
My last question, I guess, maybe is a more challenging one. Looking at the report and your findings about the evisceration of the working class and the traditional middle class blue-collar economy, and then looking at the recommendations, which were more elite high schools on one hand, and things like raise the minimum wage and housing, rental subsidies on the other, it seems to me like that almost kind of acknowledges and accepts that this two-tier economy is going to occur permanently, and that therefore we should help those who can to join it, and then try to politically reallocate some wealth to people at the bottom, but without really trying to recreate an engine of opportunity. Is that how you see it playing out?
No, of course not. First of all, I appreciate your challenging questions, and I appreciate your colleagues' challenging questions because they force me to think and introspect more deeply. And actually, we're in this not to promote any one of our own theories, but to actually create a better way of urban living. I think the engine of the economy is the creative, innovative, you can put whatever word, entrepreneurial segment, Schumpeterian segment. If you don't like my word, you don't have to use it. I mean, that's the engine of wealth creation. Much like the old manufacturing economy was the engine of wealth creation in my dad's day. So I think one of the things that worries me is what I see in San Francisco, the attack on technology. And one of the things this report is saying, we can't do that. We can't afford to do that. We have to grow the innovation economy, we have to grow the technology economy, grow the creative economy, diversify away from finance. But two, I think that the sad reality is that the blue-collar economy is shrinking and has been shrinking. We document about 16% of the workforce. But if you took people who actually work in factories, in the United States as a whole, it's 5 or 6%. It's less in New York City. So and I'm not saying that's what you mean is the engine, it was the engine of opportunity. I think the engine of opportunity in America today is that service class work, and that's what has me worried. I think if that work is relegated to cast-off work, crappy work, we can't improve that work, you're forced to toil in these low-wage conditions, I think we've ended the society of opportunity. And that's why I think I hit so hard in my own work, in this report, but even more so in my own work, in the fact that we've got to make service work. And I know this personally. My dad always told me the same story. I started working in a factory when I was 13. It was crappy work. It didn't pay well. It took 9 of us to make a family wage. I came back from World War II as if by magic. It wasn't magic. We created a set of public policies, institutions that made manufacturing family-supporting work backbone of America. I think we have to create a city of opportunity, and I worry. And I think I worry some of my biggest critics are debating partners, Joel Kotkin. I think I share with him this sense that what's really worrisome in America is there's an opportunity for a privileged few, and that may be as much as a third. That's not a one. It might be as much as a third of America. But boy, oh boy, for the remaining 66%, opportunity has certainly evaporated. And to put an end note on this, as someone who lives part of the year at Toronto and teaches at the University of Toronto, my big wake-up call on this was not only dealing with my critics, some of our mutual friends, it really was seeing Rob Ford's rise as a mayor. Mm-hmm. Because Rob Ford tapped into this. This is what he tapped into, this dysfunctional, drug-addicted, lunatic mayor. Who would have thought he could become mayor of a city that was called New York as if run by the Swiss, a progressive, efficient city? What he tapped into was the sense among new Canadians, new immigrants to Canada, working people, white working class, the fact that opportunity had been drying up and that the downtown urban progressive creatives, whatever, had sucked up everything. And you could be a municipal worker, you could be someone who was working in City Hall, a university professor, you could be a techie, it didn't matter. They were all the people who were sucking the life out of the city. And the real Torontonians, the working class people, the new Canadians were sinking further behind. So I think that's why we have to shift the conversation. And I like to think of about it as creating not an urbanism for the elite few, but an urbanism for all. And that's a way of saying this. That's hopefully things that I'll be talking about in my new book.
Richard Florida, thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure being with you.